In the last lesson, we talked about global scope, and in this lesson, we're going to talk about local scope. So let's start a program. We'll call it local.py. And what we'll do first is define a function we've seen many times here, square. But we're going to define it differently. Here's how we would define it normally, as what I call a one-liner, return number times number. But just to show you the difference between global and local scope, I'm going to introduce a new variable squared, which will receive the value of taking the parameter and multiplying it by itself. And then we will return squared as the return value of the function. And then just to demonstrate that it works correctly, we'll print the square of 2. So let's run that real quick. And we get 4 just like we expected. When we introduce the variable squared, squared becomes a local variable because it is defined within the body of the function square. So we say, using our computer science terminology, that squared is local to the square function. And we can demonstrate that by trying to print the value of squared. So let's save the program and then run it. You see we get an error. Squared is not defined. Let's come back and look. Squared is not defined because we're in the global area of the program. And we're trying to access squared, yet squared has been defined only within the context of the function squared. We had no problem accessing the value of squared within the function definition, but we cannot access it in the main program because squared is local to the function square. That is the difference between global and local scope. In a global scope, a variable is accessible from anywhere in the program, from the main area and from any other function. When a variable is defined locally, as squared was, it's only accessible within the body or within the context of the function that it was defined in. This also applies to classes, which we'll look at later in the course. But for now, we'll limit the discussion to functions. So, a global variable is accessible anywhere in a program, and a local variable is accessible only within the context in which it was defined or declared. So with that, we're ready to move on to the third and last topic of this chapter, and we're going to talk about one other possible scope, and that's called nested scope.